Hello, how are you today? I was just reading in my devotional time in Acts the other day. I love reading through Acts and following Paul and all of his adventures. And there's this one passage, I forget which chapter it's in, but it says, "It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him." And what's interesting about that story is I like the part where it says, "It happened." Kind of like, well, it just so happens that his dad was sick and Paul prayed for him and he was healed. But it doesn't tell you hardly any of the story, because in the beginning of the story, it starts with Paul in Jerusalem, and he's arrested and he's beaten and he's accused of crimes he didn't commit, and they try to kill him. So long story short, he ends up on a ship going to Rome. And on his way there, he says, "Guys, I don't think we should go. I think this ship is going, God told me this ship is going to be sunk, is going to have a shipwreck," and they don't listen to him. And finally the storm hits, and they're days and days on sea, and he tells them what to do. And so they get out, their boat just falls apart, they grab pieces of wood, they end up on the shore, and it's raining, and so Paul's still having a good attitude, and he starts making a fire, and while he's making a fire, this snake jumps out and bites him. That's a whole other sermon right there. It bites him and he shakes it off into the fire, and they think he's going to die. So like, oh wow, this must have been a bad guy. But he doesn't die. And a little bit later is when we get to this verse where it just so happened they were in the neighborhood of the ruler of the islands. And as I think about that, all of these things that happened to Paul that brought him to this place were all terrible. They were all bad. And he ended up here, and what does he do? He doesn't have this bad attitude. I mean, like, maybe for me, I might be like, "Really, Lord? Really? Here I am. I'm like doing really good. I'm doing more work than the rest of the disciples. I'm preaching. I'm doing this. And now I get arrested. I get beaten. I'm in a shipwreck. And on top of that, I get bitten by a snake." You ever have that when you're with the Lord and you're like, "Really? Another thing? Really? Are you kidding me? Come on." And it doesn't faze him. And he sees somebody who's sick, and he says, "You know what? I'm going to pray for you." And he prays for him, and he's healed. And the whole island came out and heard the gospel, and all these people started following Jesus, because God brought Paul to this island. He brought him to this place. You ever been in a place and wonder, just how in the world did I get here? How did this happen? See, sometimes God or life brings us to places that we did not expect. You know, I remember years ago, we were buying a house, and our realtor realized it was a really good deal. It wasn't our realtor, he was the selling realtor, and we had no realtor. Big mistake there. And he got us to sign some documents, and he basically stole our house. We lost it. He said, "Sign these documents, I'm going to help you," and worked this out, and we signed them, and it released the house so that he could buy it, and he bought it himself. And I was pretty angry. And people would say, "God's going to give you a better house. God's going to give you this." And we ended up moving into a smaller house. It wasn't bigger. It wasn't nicer. It was smaller. But the day we moved in, I remember we were unpacking the truck, and our neighbor 2 houses down, I look and I see this little boy, probably 2 years old, in diapers, walking out into the front yard by himself. And I'm like, that's odd. We were on a busy street, so there's cars going by and whatnot. So I'm just watching, and he ends up walking all the way over to our house. And so I pick him up, and I bring him back to the house. I knock on the door, and his dad had just innocently fallen asleep, and the little boy had walked out through the garage, out of the house. And, you know, I said, "Hey, so this kid belonged to you?" You should have seen the look on his face. It was great. And ever since then, we became great friends, and they're great neighbors. And that young man even came to our church and prayed to receive the Lord years later. And as I thought about it, and I think, man, it looked like a tragedy when the house was stolen to us. But God had this way of just bringing us to where we needed to be. I mean, what might have happened? He could have gotten hit by a car. He could have gotten kidnapped. You know, and it's like, sometimes we don't realize that this stuff that happens, that the enemy wants to destroy us, is to bring us to a certain place where God has got a purpose for us. And we gotta know, we gotta believe that even though things happen and it doesn't seem right or it doesn't seem fair, that wherever we're at, God has got a plan. Might not be where I wanted to be, but it's where we need to be. So Wherever you are in life, whatever has happened, whatever tragedy, whether you're in a hospital or what kind of situation, look around. Who's around? Maybe they need Jesus. Don't be discouraged by the circumstances, so much so that you miss the opportunities that God is placing in front of you. Paul could have been totally discouraged and said, forget it, I'm done. But he wasn't. He was like, all right, this is where I'm at. They need Jesus. Don't give up. Don't quit. Don't be discouraged about how you got where you're at. Be where you're at and be the light of Jesus right there. God bless you.